Well, let's talk about the new record, Port of Morrow. I've seen you quoted as saying you were worried about this project, the first Shins record in 5 years, but at the same time, you said you thought it was the best record you've ever made. Is there a little disconnect there, or
Well, I mean, I think you just don't know what's going to happen with it. You know, I'm always second guessing myself. And I mean, at this point in my life, I've come to realize that in some ways, that's a strength. You know, your insecurities can drive you. You know, they do give you a certain energy, that anxiety is what it's called, I suppose. But I mean, so I felt that way about the record. You know, at the same time as felt really good about it, I really loved the songs. I felt like I had really done some great, you know, as far as the history of the Shins goes, this was a good job, you know. But you know, you're still like, I don't know. I mean, am I hearing it in, you know, my biased ears or something? And maybe it's not quite as cool as I'm hoping, you know. You do that.
what's changed over the past 5 years? I realize that's a loaded question.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that have changed. I mean, one of the biggest things I was working with Greg Kurstin on this record. His impact on it, you know, is cannot really be exaggerated. You know, he performs a lot on the record. He, you know, engineered the record, and just had tons of terrific ideas that I was so happy to use. So Greg, having a producer there from the beginning, that's the first time I've ever done that, other than the Broken Bells thing, you know, which was a totally different concept. You know, that was Brian Burton and I really collaborating and writing together. But having that person filling the role of the producer was really cool. I just really saw the benefits. So I wanted somebody on this. So that was a big difference. And I mean, other than that, there's not, as far as the production of the record, there's not too much of a difference, even as far as band members changing. Because I still had Dave Hernandez, and he did a lot of guitar work on the record. And Marty Crandall even came in and sat in on a song and did some keyboard work. So, you know, and it was made in similar ways. You know, it's me kind of putting together sort of a coffee shop version of these songs, and then getting down to recording that and adding everything I can think of. You know, I can tell you, I sit with the acoustic guitar usually, and I come up with the basic sort of melodic ideas. You know, the chord structure, a chord structure maybe, and a melody, and that if I can find something that really has that strange interplay that I like, I'll save that. I'll record it. And that's the beginning, you know, and I'm always doing that. And sometimes I'm piecing together those things to make songs. But recording, you know, nothing is really close to, you know, what it becomes until I start recording. So it's in recording that a lot of writing starts, you know, and the lyrics start really when the recording starts for me, generally.
And I imagine that there are always surprises along the way in that process.
Oh yeah, definitely. You know, and that's one of the really fun things about working with different people in the studio, is that everyone hears music differently. I've discovered, and you know, whereas I might come up with a certain melody or a certain guitar lick or something that I think is going to elaborate on what's there. You know, somebody like Richard Swift would come up with just a totally different idea, and it may influence and change the direction of the song aesthetically, you know, which is so fun. That's so exciting. It's almost like when somebody remixes your song and just totally tweaks it and turns it into something else, you know. Yeah, so I've got 2 daughters now, 2 and 4 they are at this time. And yeah, having kids, I think, has sensitized me to things happening in the world, I guess. For some reason, I think especially bad things happening to people. I think I care more about people for having children. It's probably a common thing with parents. You suddenly just, I mean, I remember trying to explain it to my wife. I was thinking it was as though, suddenly when you had been walking around with some separation from the world, you really you care about yourself, you're concerned about yourself to a certain extent, and then you have children, and you care about them more than you ever did yourself. But not only that, they go out away from you. They're vulnerable, They're so precious. You just love them so dearly. And you realize that there are people in this world whose children are not going to fare well. And they are going to live the nightmare that you dread. And it happens all the time. And it's just unimaginable. And I think that feeling, that sort of anxiety that you get, it did sort of inform some of the lyrics on this record. I think about the next Broken Bells record, which I can't wait to get started on, and I think the Shins is just, it's a vehicle for my songs, and I enjoy doing this, and it's one of the few things I'm good at, I suppose, as far as making a living doing
Which
something.
doesn't preclude the probability of other vehicles for your songs, of course.
Possibly, yeah, but this is you get a little bit. I have found that I'm a little bit married to this concept of the Shins and this project. It's kind of what pulled me out of my obscure life in Albuquerque and gave me the life that I have. So I'm sentimental about it, I think. When early on, it was a story that we were from Albuquerque. That was just kind of part of what was interesting about us, I think. And I moved right away to Portland. and there was, I think, a concern almost that I was somehow going to now, I don't know, get sucked into like this bigger city's music scene and sort of become something different. And I don't know if that has happened really. I mean, certainly not to the extent that I've altered my technique or something in how I write or anything. So, I don't know how much it really matters. I've found that, even on tour, sometimes I'll come up with a cool lick or something and I'll be in the backstage. Australia, that song, I ended up writing that on tour in Australia, just randomly. And I rarely do that, but once in a while it happens. I think it's so internal that maybe hopefully it doesn't matter where you live.